So today's event will change your relationship to your stuff and make you aware of and cherish the stories of your life. Jeff's going to present I'm going to introduce him first, and then he's going to present his book, and then I'll interview him, and we'll have time for a Q&A afterwards. And then I'll do some preparation for these optional discussion circles that you can join. So I'm happy to introduce Jeff Grenwald, who I've known for years and done dozens and dozens of events with. He's always engaging, he's always surprising, and you're in for a treat. So I wanted to give his longer bio that gives a whole arc of his career, but Jeff doesn't he hates long bios. So you can go to his website, which is jeffgreenwald.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can read his fascinating longer bio, but I'm going to start in the spring of '83 when he was awarded a journalism fellowship by the Rotary Foundation, and he left for a 16-month residency in Kathmandu, Nepal. During this time, he traveled across Asia, writing articles for Geo and Island magazines, and this is when it all started. So I want to talk about his books. So I have a little library downstairs in my house, and I have all of Jeff's books, and I went looking for them, and I was wishing that I would have alphabetized my library because they were all scattered. And if it was alphabetized, Jeff, you would be between Fitzgerald and Hemingway. And I treasure your books just as much as those.
Thank you.
So his first book is Mr. Raja's Neighborhood. And I'm just going to read the blurb from Lori Marks in the Express, San Francisco. Grenwald does give good story, letting nonfiction fly into the wilds of the imagination. He becomes the lone Western stranger lost in an even stranger land of no boundaries and shocking custom. And his journey becomes the epitome of his deep desire to enter a sacred place within himself. This is his theme song, and the thread which ties the letters together is almost magical. When I first read this book, I was really struck by this thing that we talked about last time, which is this thing of us traveling to a place and then feeling this really odd resonance within ourselves with the place. And I felt like in this book, Jeff, you really capture what you felt when you first went to Nepal. It's really beautiful. Shopping for Buddhas was recently released in a 25th anniversary edition. It's the much beloved tale of Jeff's quest across the Himalaya and through Kathmandu. Tim Cahill called it the classic book on Nepal, and we're gonna talk about it a little bit later because it relates to this new book in some kind of interesting ways, I think. The Size of the World is the chronicle of his around the world overland voyage. It was a national bestseller, and he's credited with doing the first travel blog posts from overseas.
Well, not quite from overseas, maybe on the internet.
On the internet, the first blog post
yes.
on the internet. Okay, well, that's kind of exciting, and you can find if you Google that, you can find a bunch of articles that kind of explain that. His next book was Future Perfect, How Star Trek Conquered Planet Earth. And I love what San Jose Mercury News said about this. It takes a lot of attitude, real life, boldly going attitude to produce a book like this. It's a book you're going to have. And as you will probably discover, attitude is one thing that Jeff definitely has in spades. Scratching the Surface is a collection of his shorter travel essays, and I've used this many times in my teaching. I pulled out a few essays kind of as examples of how to write a travel essay, and they're it's a really great collection. And then his novel about the revolution in Nepal, Snake Lake, Mary Roach called it brave, honest, vivid, and thoughtful book. His two most recent books were co-authored, The 9 Gifts with Christina Marie Mason and Out of Nothing with Burning Man founder Larry Harvey. And if we have time, we'll talk about that one a little bit later too. But his writings are published in print and online worldwide, and his stories appear in more than 25 travel anthologies. We've been together quite often in the pages of best travel writing anthologies. And he also has three excerpts of Morocco stories in vignettes and postcards from Morocco, which is my anthology about Morocco, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later too. And that's just his writing. He's also the executive director of Ethical Traveler, a global alliance dedicated to creating positive global change through travel. He's also been host of the Ethical Traveler podcast, and he's done a critically acclaimed solo performance at the Marsh Theater and elsewhere called Strange Travel Suggestions, which until COVID was drawing sold out houses still at the Marsh Theater. And now he has this performance based on his new book, this one. This is the one he's talking about today, 108 Beloved Objects, letting go of stuff and keeping our stories. I have to say, Jeff, like, you've done it again with this book. It's really fabulous. It's like a memoir in heirlooms, and it's rich in images, and we're going to try to show you some of the images in the book. But the book is laid out, and Jeff will talk about this a little bit more, with a large image and a little essay about the image. So, and this is like your first event other than your stage performance at the Marsh for this book. So Jeff, welcome. We're excited to hear about it.
Everyone's muted. No sound of all these hands clapping. Yeah, well, this current book, 108 Beloved Objects, actually started as an attempt to get my solo show into book form. I don't know if any of you saw the solo show. It had a kind of an interesting conceit. People from the audience would come onto the stage and spin this huge wheel of fortune that had 30 stops on it. And the stops all stood for different themes: the deep blue sea, the starry night, meetings with remarkable women, the fool, the magician. And based on where it landed, I would tell a story based on that theme for my travels. And people kept asking me, is there any way to put the show into a book? And there really wasn't. And this book really isn't the show, but it's as close as I could come. I took 108 objects from my life, had a tribal art photographer do portraits of them, and then wrote a story, a nonfiction story inspired by each object. Sometimes it's the literal story of how I came by that object. Sometimes it's a sort of story about the area that object is from. And sometimes it's just about a certain memory or time of my life that that object evokes. And there's so many threads came together before this book actually came to the book. Part of it was just sort of the knowledge that we're just surrounded by too much stuff. And why do we need all this stuff in our lives? What we really want, what we really keep and want to hold on to, is the stories connected to things that we own. Once you have a nice digital photograph of an item or a souvenir, you really don't need the item itself cluttering up your flat or your apartment or your house, as long as you can tell the story about it to somebody. You know, I have no heirs. I have no one to leave my things to. And about 10 years ago, I was working at a law firm in San Francisco. It had gone bankrupt, and they had hired me to help sort of dispose of all their legal files before they closed their doors. The second floor of the law firm, in this big skyscraper in San Francisco, was where all the researchers and legal aides and paralegals and other staff had been. When the firm was shut down, they were given 15 minutes to leave their office. And so my boss brought me up to that second floor, and it was like the wreck of a ship that had been abandoned by aliens, that had been taken over by aliens. Everything was still on the desks. The ashtrays, well, not ashtrays in San Francisco, but like little knickknacks, Mother's Day cards, Swiss Army knives people had in their desk. They'd like left this place with all of their possessions behind. And I asked my friend who took me up to the second floor, what's going to happen to all this stuff? There's like thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff here, world globes, jelly bean banks. And she said, it's just all going to be bulldozed into a dumpster. That's what happens to stuff that gets left behind. And when I heard that, I just decided probably the best idea for me is just to try to give away as much stuff as possible before I go bankrupt and get shuttered. And so this book is an attempt to sort of get rid of 108 objects. And as it says in the back of the book, any of the objects can be yours if you write me an email explaining why you want it. Some of them are already spoken for, some are not. They run the gamut from valuable statues to a blue yo-yo to the catheter that was put in my body when I was treated for a staph infection in my spine. So all these intimate and general objects that came from all over my life as early as the 1970s and as recently as, 2020. So that's what the book is all about. I hope that made sense. It's kind of a lot of themes going there. And that's all I really have to say about that book in particular, except that it's very liberating to have everything out there like this and to sort of honor these objects. And the subtitle of the book, as Erin read, is Letting Go of Stuff, Keeping Our Stories. And that's really what it's all about and what my life at this point is all about. So, oh, that's right. I was going to read something from the book.
Good idea.
Yes, Erin suggests I do a little reading. I'm sorry that it's actually a reading because normally I tell these stories on the stage, but the whole point of the book is to have them as written stories where you have a lot more control over the language. So let me get to one of them. Erin, I know you wanted to hear the teapot story, but were you
I'll ask you about that one later.
Okay,
Yeah.
So this is actually the book is divided up into 6 sections of 18 chapters each. And the sections have different titles, like the stops on the wheel. It begins with travel, it goes to love, spirit, gifts, earth, moon, and stars, endings, and I think I might have already said spirit. And the first section is called travel, and the first story in it is about a trip. It's about a teapot, and I wonder if you can see this picture if I hold it up. I'd asked Erin to hold up these pictures while I read the story.
I can hold them up.
This is the teapot in the book, and if you'll allow me, I'll read you this little story. All the stories are about 300 to 400 words long. I call them flash nonfiction. Silver Teapot, Morocco, 1994. During a Q&A at a travel writers conference, I was asked which interview in the course of my career had been my favorite. It was a tough question. Over the years, I've been privileged to interview many brilliant and strange people, from Buzz Aldrin to Grace Slick. But the interview that came to mind, the one that moved me most deeply, was my 1994 encounter with the Morocco-based writer and composer, Paul Bowles. My meeting with Bowles seemed fated. Striding up to the desk at the tourist bureau in Tangier, I'd announced my desire to meet the author of The Sheltering Sky. The clerk regarded me with amusement. I was probably the 10th such request he'd had that week. Then a voice piped up behind me. A taxi driver wearing a white jalaba and red fez said he knew where Bowles lived. Honestly? Honestly. Off we sped along the boulevards of Tangier. He pulled up at a weathered apartment building and told me the room number. Sheepishly, I knocked on the door. Large male housekeeper was off-putting. Bowles was not to be disturbed. I just want to convey my respect and gratitude, I replied. The man harumphed. Wait, he said, and closed the door. A moment later, he reappeared. Mr. Bowles will see you in 5 minutes. I found Bowles sitting up in bed, a lit Keef cigarette smoking in an ashtray amidst a riot of pill bottles upon his nightstand. He held out a papery hand. I hope you didn't come to meet the last great beat writers, he said. You were never a beat writer, I countered. You were much more literary. Sit down, Bowles said, nodding toward the end of the bed. His housekeeper brought in a small pot of tea. We talked for hours well into the evening about writing, music, Morocco travel, the future, old age, and death. Bowles even questioned about my habitual nail biting. It's surely not about hunger, he noted. When the sky grew dark, I regretfully took my leave. Bowles wrote down his address and asked that I stay in touch. Thank you for your time and for your friendship, I said. It was easy, he replied. To this day, I have never heard sweeter words. Exiting the building a few moments later, I had to laugh. My taxi driver was waiting for me at the curb, his meter still running.
That's characteristic of Morocco, isn't it?
I knew there'd be something in it for him at the end. Would you like me to read another piece?
Yeah, maybe you can read one more, and then I think it would be sort of interesting if you, as you said, you also do them as this stage performance, so you also tell. So maybe you can read one more and then actually tell another one.
Do you have a story you'd like me to tell us the next one?
Well,
How about
whichever ones that we've talked about.
You like the Buddha coin bank, don't you?
Yeah.
Would you like me to do that one?
Yeah, what
Buddha
page
coin
is it
bank.
on? I'll show the
It's
image.
actually a pretty big book bank. It's about a foot tall. It's got a slot in the head appropriately.
Foot tall. It doesn't seem like it would be a foot tall.
So this is from 2008, Buddha coin bank. I'm one of those people who has never been able to make any money. Real money, that is. Lord knows I've tried. Endless ambitious projects and creations, from publishing 6 books to launching a stage show to founding what I believed would be an immensely successful nonprofit. A travel podcast, group trips to Cuba and Nepal, freelance editing. I'm sure I'm leaving out about a dozen things. But riches have eluded me, though I have been able to put a little away. It's not enough to buy even a small home here in Oakland, but it's enough to keep the hounds of debt at bay. Colleagues who are not as self-critical as I point out that, in fact, I have managed to make a living as a freelance writer, no small achievement. The freedom seemed heady at first. Now that many of my friends are retiring with handsome pensions, I'm wondering who struck the better bargain. But wealth and worldly comforts are notoriously transient. The only thing we truly have, and not for long, is our time, moment to moment, in this earthly realm. I've maintained some control over my own time, but not without continual episodes of doubt and anxiety. It's a slippery thing, devoting oneself to a career in the arts. This Buddha coin bank was a gift to me on my 54th birthday, the day I outlived my father, who died one day short of his own. Though it's never held even a penny, it serves to remind me of a quote that Albert Einstein once wrote on his chalkboard at Princeton. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. I don't know how many lessons I'll learn in this lifetime, or what I'll cherish or regret most in the end, but I hope I can find peace with the choices I've made, gratitude for what I've achieved, and satisfaction with the modest level of financial security I've been able to reach. That, for me, would pass for enlightenment.
All right, thank you. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about like the chapters and how they're laid out. I think you were thinking about reading a little bit from the gifts introduction, and then maybe you can actually tell one of these stories as you would if you were on the stage.
Well, I don't know if I can do that. That actually takes quite a bit of preparation.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Usually tell a story, but I can tell brief ones, but the actual 10 or 15-minute stage length story
Right.
take hours of preparation to memorize the outlines and everything else. But I will talk a bit about the structure of the book because it's interesting. I mentioned that there were 6 sections: travel, gifts, love, earth, moon, and stars, spirit, endings, and spirit. Each section begins with a short story about an object that is not pictured in the book, that sort of sets the theme of that section. And with your permission, Erin, if you have the patience, all of you, I would read the chapter beginning the section on gifts. which is also a story for my stage show, but here it is sort of refined and condensed. And maybe some of you will relate to this. Let me get a little sip of water before I actually read it.
This is a very writerly excerpt. So I know I see some people who are writers here, so it will be inspiring to you, I think.
Okay, here we go. I had never been more terrified in my life. It was May 1970. I was 16 years old, sitting on the train from Hicksville to Manhattan. Months earlier, I had written a 5-page fan letter to my favorite author, who happened to live in Sri Lanka. Out of nowhere came a postcard telling me he was in New York and invited me to pay him a visit. He was staying at the Chelsea Hotel. I put on my only sports jacket and boarded the Long Island Railroad in the 90-degree heat. The train was late, of course. When we pulled into Penn Station, I jumped off and sprinted toward 23rd Street. By the time I got to the Chelsea, I was slick with sweat, the manila envelope holding 2 of my science fiction stories limp under my arm. Arthur C. Clarke greeted me at his door, grinning widely and shaking my hand. A portable typewriter sat on a table by the window, a breeze crackling the sheet of paper nested beneath the roller. He offered me tea. I loosened my tie. We talked about his life as a writer, his work with Stanley Kubrick on 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the ongoing Apollo program. The United States was landing men on the moon every few months, and Clarke co-hosted the live TV coverage with his friend Walter Cronkite. I did a lot of nodding. It took me nearly an hour to work up my courage. I wonder, I stammered, if you would read these stories I brought. I think they're pretty good. Clarke's face flashed briefly with horror. Years later, I'd understand that sinking feeling of being cornered and asked to look at an unpublished writer's work, but I would never come up with an alibi as good as his. I can't do it. He shook his head, leaning forward over his knees. My publisher forbids it because there's a chance that even unconsciously, I might steal one of your ideas. It made perfect sense to me. And then it was time to go. I slipped my sports coat on over my white shirt and asked to use the bathroom. In a flash, it was over, the greatest moment of my young life, until I left the Chelsea Hotel. There, in the kiln of the New York spring, I remembered I had left the manila envelope with my stories on Clarke's bathroom sink. Shame washed over me like a tsunami. I could not possibly go back to Clarke's room to reclaim it. He may have already gone to the bathroom himself, seen the packet, and cursed the manipulative moocher who had left it there. That quickly, the entire tenor of our encounter turned inside out, like a sudden switch of the Earth's magnetic poles. My North Star had dropped south. I took the train home. There was no way to even speak of the incident, so I hid my unforgivable blunder behind a bright narrative and tried to push the whole thing out of my head. A few weeks later, my mother knocked on my bedroom door. I recognized the envelope she held out to me, my name in loose cursive, the return address, the scene of my crime. Inside were my stories. Clarke had gone over each one of them with a red flare pen, highlighting my most grievous errors. There were many. One example that stays with me was a paragraph where I had my space explorers bouncing around on the planet Saturn. A little difficult, Clarke had inscribed, as Saturn is a gas giant. I read through his edits with a sinking heart. But then at the end of the second story, he'd switched colors. Did you leave these here by accident? He'd written in green. In any case, I'd say you still have about 1 million words of writing to do, but you're just about where I was at 16. This was his second lie, but it was also the greatest gift I've ever received.
Oh, thank you. Wow. I always encourage writers who I know and work with to reach out to their favorite authors like that. I just love that idea that you wrote him a letter and then you heard that he was in New York and he invited you there.
We
Yeah,
stayed friends until his death
yeah.
in 2007 or 8, I think it was. I visited him in Sri Lanka 3 or 4 times.
And your object, you have the ping pong balls.
Yes, there's an
Right.
object from Arthur C. Clarke in the book as well.
Here's
He's a
here's
great
the
ping pong
image.
player. And the one and only time I ever beat him at ping pong, I made him sign the ping pong balls and give them to me.
So you're giving those away.
Those are
That's
also in the
amazing.
book, yeah.
Okay, so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the distribution of this book. I know that the first 108 copies are hardback and they're kind of a special edition. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the idea came to me to do this more as an art project than as a book. So we decided to print and bind 108 hardcover copies of 108 Beloved Objects and have them signed and numbered and sell them for $108 a piece. And each one of the 108 signed and numbered copies is also signed by an artist named Sylvie Alcivar, who's a well-known North Beach poet and artist. And she's created a small literary sculpture, each one different, to go with each of the 108 books in the limited edition. Sometime next year, I'm not quite sure when, maybe around March, there'll be a trade paperback available and print on demand, but it won't be the same quality as the hardcover, which was quite an effort and expense to produce. As those of you who have ever self-published a hardcover photo book would be aware.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the images are just so gorgeous. It's really kind of a coffee table book, right? A coffee table book for couch potatoes, because then you can read the essay too.
And it's not entirely a travel book. I mean, a lot of the stories in there are about my personal life, my family life, my different careers, my hobby as a photographer, my friendships, and my medical history, which has gotten very complicated over the past 3 years.
We talked a little bit about this one, this communications satellite tree ornament. I know you don't probably have time to read the whole thing, but I really love, one of the things I love most about each essay and item is that you talk about the object as it relates to you and your history, but then you sort of point to a larger truth or a larger feeling that we all experience. And I wonder if you can talk about that one a little bit. It's on page 16.
Not very long. It's shorter than the last few I've read.
All right, you can read it.
And it's one of the last items in the chapter called Gifts, which I just read the introduction to. So I'll read this short little piece. I already showed you the picture. It's a tree ornament shaped like an early communication satellite. It's kind of silvery. I don't know if that comes through on the screen.
No, it's really pretty.
There are objects in my life with sketchy origins. This silvery satellite was possibly a gift from David McCutcheon, an artist and inventor who appears in several of these stories. We met in 1980 when I was an editor at the Santa Barbara News and Review. He, like me, is a fan of spaceships, robots, and dinosaurs. Though I don't celebrate Christmas, for many years I went to a tree trimming party hosted by my friend Joan Walsh in Oakland, later San Francisco. Joan had also worked at the News and Review. She moved on to write for The Nation, MSNBC, and CNN. Her transition to New York City ended the tree trimming holiday tradition, at least for me. Although I donated many ornaments to that tree, Joan and her daughter Nora decorated over the years. A bamboo stork, a ceramic pickle, a tiny conga drum. I could never bring myself to part with this satellite. It seemed in some way a symbol of loneliness, out of place during the holiday season. Looking at it now reminds me how far I am from my old friends. David lives in Portland, Joan is in Harlem, I call Oakland home. We're each of us in our own orbit, yet it's satellites like these that keep us connected, our affection expressed via social media posts and Zoom parties. That I've held on to this ornament saddens me. It might otherwise be providing Joan and Nora a quantum of Christmas pleasure. Maybe we remind them of me. They'd remember the night they unwrapped it over plates of holiday ham and martinis, their initial mystification, my convoluted explanation, its placement on a high, hidden pine branch. When I think that way, the satellite embodies a poignant paradox. Some objects don't really have stories unless we give them away.
All right, thank you. So I found myself kind of reflecting as I was reading your book about like my earliest possessions. And I actually, I have moved many times since I was a little girl, and I have always taken her with me. So Snow White, I don't know why I love her so much. That she came with a watch when I was probably about 4, and she's kind of a symbol of, you know, living with 7 slobby men and cleaning up after them. But I also was thinking about, like, my favorite possessions as a kid were my records and my record player and my books. And my books still are among my favorite possessions. But I wonder about you when you were a little kid, like if you have memories of your favorite objects when you were little.
When I was little,
Yeah.
oh boy, was I ever little?
I think I saw a picture of you as a baby once.
Probably my Stingray bicycle. Was one of
There
my
you go.
prized possessions. I also love my little 45 player.
Yes.
You know, that was a great thing to have. I had a flexible flyer sled. I grew up on the East Coast, which I, you know, loved during the winter season, and just it was an over-the-top, huge flexible flyer, red runners, you know, pine. I think it was pine that they made those out of. It might have been a harder wood than that, and that was something I really loved. I have never been super materialistic. I can't remember anything else that truly leaps out at me from when I was a little kid. I had stuffed animals when I was really little. In fact, the earliest possession I can remember was a giant stuffed Rin Tin Tin dog. And I remember it had a really soft, furry body, but a molded plastic head. I don't remember what happened to it, but I remember I used to sit on it and watch TV shows like, you know, Bozo the Clown or Romper Room when I was like 3 or 4 years old. This was living in Pasadena. We moved out there for about 9 months. And I don't remember, my last memory of the Rin Tin Tin doll, whatever it is, stuffed animal, is of the head torn off and stuffing all over the living room floor. I don't know.
You tore the head off?
No, I would not have torn the head off of a stuffed dog. That's not my way. That's not my way.
Okay, well, if you would have let me read your longer bio, I would have mentioned that back in the day, you were a sculptor, you were an artist, and you essentially made things. So it's kind of full circle for you. And I want to talk a little bit about shopping for Buddhas, because you become obsessed with this object in the very best way. I wanted to read a little part from the first part of the book when you were in Nepal and you were caught in this storm, and then it's kind of it's a arduous journey to get through the storm, and then you discover that the stock market has crashed during that storm. So I'm just going to read this little paragraph. At that moment, I was enlightened and realized life and wealth are transitory. The only way to protect yourself against these implacable truths is to invest in Buddhas. That way, even if the stock market tanks, you have something real, something that will continue to appreciate in value. And even if that fails, if the market for Asian art dries up completely, if there's an apocalypse or something, well, then you still have the Buddha and you can learn non-attachment from it. So I wonder if you can sort of share this scene and shopping for Buddhas with Lalji and your Mr. Jeffries statue. And then I'm going to ask you a question related to that and this book.
Oh boy. Okay, so Lalji was a very well-known palm reader who lived in Kathmandu. And the story takes place, during the early 1980s. And I had started to visit Lalji. The woman I was dating at the time brought me to his little house because she was a friend of his. And he read my palm and he talked to me for about an hour. And I was very skeptical of all these Hindu mystics and all that, astrology, palmistry. I don't have much patience for any of that. And Lalji just sat there sort of nodding. And then he looked at me and he said, my prediction is that if you don't learn to be less neurotic, you're going to be in a mental institution within 10 years, guaranteed. I was completely outraged by his remark. And I told him I was an artist. We had all these discussions about art. And he challenged me. He said, I challenge you to make one work of art, a single work of art, that is neither, I can't remember the words he used, neurotic and, do you remember, Erin, what was the other
I
word?
don't know. I can look it up. It's in the book.
Something in neurotic. So after I got my Buddha statue, I went to see Lalji again with this assemblage I put together, which I thought was the answer to his challenge. And it was the Buddha I had bought, hidden in a day pack, hung over the back of a chair with a candle burning on the arm of the chair. So I assembled this in front of Lalji in his backyard in Kathmandu. And I said, there it is. This is my statue. It is completely, non-self-conscious and non-neurotic. And I call it Mr. Jeffrey. That's what he called me, Mr. Jeffrey. So Mr. Jeffrey, where's your statue? And I explained the statue to him, in a very sort of self-congratulatory way. There's inside the day pack sort of represents mobility, which was sort of the center of my life right then. Inside the day pack, hidden but always there, was the Buddha to be consulted whenever needed. The chair was a symbol of complete relaxation, and the flame a symbol of sort of burning away all the obstacles inside of yourself that stand between you and a peaceful, contented life. And I went through all these elements of the statue with him, and he stood up and walked around the statue. He took out the Buddha, he put it on the ground, grabbed the day pack, and he said, what you've made a statue of here is complete neurosis and garbage. And he threw the day pack into a little pond in his backyard. And then he said, what do you need to carry anything around with when you're traveling? Just carry your spirit, carry your sense of humor, carry your openness of soul. Then he looked at the candle, he said, these flames I've been talking about to you are to be internalized. They're not to be literal flames. That's very silly and dangerous. And he broke off the candle and threw that into the pond. And he picked up the chair and he said, if you're truly relaxed within yourself, what do you need to have, what use of a chair? And he tossed that out into his yard. And then he took the Buddha and he said, and when you're truly enlightened, what need do you even have of a Buddha statue? And I was terrified he was going to throw it into the pond because I would have dived right in after it, even though it was sort of a disgusting pond, probably full of leeches. But instead, he just sort of, basketball tossed it to me, and I caught it against my chest. And I can't remember what he said at the end of that. Let me see if I can just read his last line from that little section there, because it's pretty telling. So the last paragraph, he picked up the chair, got a grip on it, and spinning around like a shot putter, rolled it off to the side of the yard. So what then, he cried. You can come to me and say, see, Lalji, there is my sculpture. There it is. He gestured at the empty space where the chair had been. And if I can perceive it, fine. And if not, well, at least you have created something truly reflective of your cleansed mind and your cleansed body. At that point, I withdraw my challenge. At that point you will be 100% a complete man and a complete artist.
I love that.
An early lesson in the utility of possessions, but I still do have the Buddha statue, of course.
Okay, so in giving away these objects and writing this book and preparing to, dispose of these possessions, what have you learned about attachment? And can you kind of relate it back to the whole concept and shopping for Buddhas? Like the whole non-attachment.
The question, I guess, really comes up. What are we really attached to? Are we attached to the objects themselves, or is that a lie we're telling ourselves? Are we actually attached to the story? Owning an object, most objects, especially art objects, only avails you of one thing. it gives you the right to transport that object from one place to another. You're taking it from a gallery into your house, from a curio shop in Kathmandu into your home. You know, you're just sort of moving the object from one place to another. But the story that you associate with the object, that's all that you really are attached to. And even that one day you'll have to let go of, unless, of course, you write a book about these stories. I have never been a super materialistic person. I think I said that before. But somehow, over a 35-year career in travel journalism, I've managed to amass an enormous amount of objects. And I'm learning to become less attached from them. This book is not just sort of, a book of flash nonfiction that's fun to read. It's also a challenge to myself. When somebody comes to me and says, I want those ping pong balls that were autographed by Arthur C. Clarke, what will it feel like to let those things go? There's one chapter in my book, it's of a respirator. And the story I tell is about the Oakland fire, which I believe it was in 1989, that destroyed the Hiller Highlands in Oakland and almost burned down the Claremont Hotel. And two very close friends of mine, Patrick and Sheila, lost their home and all their possessions in that fire. They were both visual artists, and she was also a sound recordist. All of their possessions, everything they owned, was completely destroyed by the fire. In fact, in what had been their garage, there was a mass of sort of wire and little pieces of brass. And I asked them, what is this? What was this? And they said that was a suitcase containing all the letters, this is what Sheila was saying, that my mother and father wrote to each other during World War II. Because if there was ever an earthquake, it was the first thing I was going to save. And of course, the suitcase and all its contents had been reduced to ash. And at that point in their lives, with nothing left literally but the shirts on their backs and shorts, because they'd been down at the beach in San Francisco before the fire, they sat down with each other and decided to start their whole lives from square one. And they began by asking each other the question, do we stay married? And the answer was yes, but they had the courage, having lost everything, to rebuild their lives from scratch. And it's so beautiful. I was at their house a few weeks ago, and they've rebuilt, of course, and they've started creating more art. But I remember that along with the sort of tragedy and terror of having lost everything, there was also this enormous sense of liberation. They didn't have the choice, like these refugees, in Syria or in Afghanistan, or when I was in Southeast Asia, the people fleeing Pol Pot's Cambodian regime. They left everything behind and started a new life. And sometimes I think that to have objects taken from you that way would sort of be a lot easier than having to get rid of them yourself or give them away, which is something a lot of us have done during the pandemic. I mean, as you walk around the streets in Oakland, maybe it's less true in Seattle or in Sausalito, there are boxes out by every curve of all these precious items that people are now letting go of because they realize that their personal space doesn't have to be a reflection of how much stuff they've collected. And they're happy to give away books and clothes and boots and trophies and lighting fixtures and Lego sets and you name it. Everything you could ever imagine is out there on the curves as people sort of come to the realization that stuff is really just stuff, no matter what kind of value we put on it. No matter what story we tell ourselves about its value, it's the story itself that is the only thing that truly has any value.
That perfectly segues into my next question, which, I mean, I was thinking about, during COVID, how our stuff kind of stared at us, right? Like, and also during that time, I ended up moving because I mean, it's a longer story, but I was in Paris during COVID and then I came to Seattle because my kids are here. And then I kind of decided to move here from Sausalito. So I had all my stuff packed up from, I didn't go down there. I had someone else pack my stuff up. And it was like, at that point in the pandemic, it was early in the pandemic, I didn't really care. Like, as long as everybody was alive and gonna stay alive, my stuff it just kind of faded from importance. And when it got here, then I did this thing when I was unpacking, which was like I would look at an item like this, right? Like I would look at the item, and if I felt kind of an exchange of energy with it, I would keep it. And if I didn't, I would just get rid of it. And now also I have in my garage downstairs, I have a lot of my parents' old stuff and my grandmother's stuff. And it feels kind of heavy to me now, items, after having moved all that stuff from there to here. And also especially stuff that holds other people's stories, the stuff that holds my parents' stories, my grandmother's stories. It has that kind of a heavy feel. You say in the introduction to this book, sometimes a single object, like a book of matches, is enough to bring back the smell of a jazz club in Hong Kong. A black stone can conjure a holy mountain. Like our genetic maps, such objects decode the priorities and attachments that have shaped who we are. So I'm wondering for you, like, so they decode our priorities and our attachments. So when you were writing these stories, was that like the decoding? And do the stories, like when you were writing the stories, did the attachments and the meaning of the object become more clear? And do the stories have a different feel than the things? Do you feel lighter? Having sort of, it's almost like you transferred the meaning and the importance from the objects to the stories. So I'm wondering if that has a different feel than the objects themselves.
Well, of course, the stories are different than the objects. And there's sort of a reciprocal relationship between the objects and the stories. When I was writing these stories over the past 5 years, because I started the book about 5 years ago, I would look at an object and sometimes a story would come to mind and sometimes I'd just start sort of what's called wild writing, as my friend Lori Wagner teaches. And also my friend Tanya, who was on this Zoom call earlier. I just started writing whatever came to my mind, evoked by the object. Other objects like the ping pong balls or a blue yo-yo or a Kodak beaker have very specific stories associated with them. And when that happened, I told those stories. There's that connection between the stories and the objects. Writing the stories makes the objects more vivid, but it also makes them less necessary. I mean, if the point of writing this book wasn't to become more connected to these objects, it was to learn to let go, not just of these 108 objects, but of everything. I mean, I'm in my 60s. I might have 10 or 20 years left to live. I'm going to have to let go of everything at some point anyway. We all are. And when I go into people's houses that are sparse, almost meditative, I don't feel a sense that they don't have enough stuff. I feel envious of their clarity of having so little around them.
Yeah.
So no, there's not a sense of the story of these objects becoming more important, or my relationship with them changes, and that once their story is told, I'm ready to release them. They won't cease to exist. I could even come visit them once in a while. Friends take them, but I don't need to hold on to them. And the stories, if I were to sit down now and write stories for each of these 108 objects, for a lot of them, it might be a completely different story.
Interesting.
The Buddha Coin Bank is a great example. The story I just read about the Buddha Coin Bank. I never used the bank. It's sitting in my closet, and it's not in my closet with the other 108 objects, still in the packaging it came with. We took it out to photograph it. But looking at that bank made me think about my career as a writer and my relationship to money. And that was the story that came out there. The teapot's a little more literal. And there are other stories that are even more literal. I mean, the PICC line, the catheter that was put up my arm and into my heart is one of the objects in the book. And that, evokes the story of what happened to me physically and how my community of friends stepped forward to take care of me when I needed them.
That's really awesome.
I don't need to hold on to this PICC line that was in my heart.
I'll be interested to see who likes to acquire that.
I have some doctor friends who may or may not be interested.
That's awesome. So I'm wondering if writing this book changed how you acquire stuff.
How I acquire stuff.
Mhm.
I think it changed if I acquire stuff. I'm trying to think of the last thing I really acquired since starting to write this book. That's actually a really good question. I wish I'd known in advance because I'm sure I could have remembered the last thing I've acquired. I think most of the things I've acquired since writing the book have been utilitarian.
Right.
You know, an exercise by a knee scooter from a recent foot surgery. You know, you don't acquire music anymore the way you used to, which is something I really miss, going to the record store, the CD store, and leafing through the bins. I don't buy books anymore, you know, when I can help it, unless they're written by friends of mine. I want to support them that way.
Right.
Things like, you know, the Zoom lamp. Yeah, I don't really buy things anymore.
Oh, well, interesting. So let's talk about the, I'm sorry, what?
We do buy gifts for other people.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about the Pablos Teapot because you have these fabulous excerpts in my Morocco book, and one of the excerpts is that interview with Pablos, and I also have in that book just a gorgeous piece of writing by Pablos himself. His essay gave me the permission to use it, and he figures so much into my experience of Morocco. And I had seen that teapot, like I'd been to your house a lot of times, and I had seen it in your kitchen, and it just, you know, those Moroccan teapots just evoke, like, you know, the banging labyrinth of the Fez Medina and sugar drenched mint tea and the music and the tagines and the cloves and cinnamon and honey and lemon. And this is kind of funny. It goes to how we imbue these objects with our stories, because I knew the whole story of that interview. Obviously, it's in my book. And somehow when I first read your piece here about that object, somehow I was thinking it was actually Pablo's teapot. And I was like, well, I want that. And so I wrote you this thing, and I think I quoted Pablos, you know, just the way, and I'm going to have you talk in a minute about how you're asking people to acquire these things, right? So I went through your steps and wrote you, and then you know, and so I'm going to get this teapot. It's going to go in this glass front cabinet in my house, but then, yeah, there it is. And then, but then when I reread the entry, I was like, it's not his teapot, of course. Like, I was like, what was the part in the interview where he gave him the teapot? And it was like this thing that I put into that object that is kind of interesting. And so, like, these stories of the objects, sometimes it's straight out of our imagination. In fact, I think I posted it on Facebook, which was a bit of misinformation that I actually.
I didn't have the heart to correct you. Yeah, that would have been great.
And then I was like, well, when did he give it to him? I don't remember
the guy
that.
to pull balls, and he says, "Here, take this teapot before you go."
I know, but it was in my head, right? Like I was just like, yeah. So when I have it, it will imbue you and Pablos and Morocco and everything. But I would like you to talk a little bit about how people can acquire these objects, but then also, as you give these away, I'm wondering if you, with the act of giving it away, loosens your tethers to it, or do you kind of imagine, like I think I sent you a photo the other day, like here's where I'm going to put the teapot, and then I wondered, like, is he envisioning these objects in their other homes, or do you just not care, or like, so anyway, first talk about how people can acquire the objects, and then talk about like how you feel about their future homes.
Well, to acquire the objects, basically, you have to first acquire the book. And you can choose an object from the book if it's not already taken, and write to me, tell me the number of your edition, 1 through 108. And I will send you, for the cost of postage, the object that you want. You know, there's no charge for the object itself, of course. I have no idea where these objects will end up. I think they have a completely different story associated with them now. If someone were to take one, like when you take the teapot that you just described, you have a whole story surrounding the teapot that's peripheral to and adjacent to the story I tell about the teapot. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if somebody like my sister or Michael or Kimberly or Julie or Karen takes one of the objects and puts it in their home. I don't know, but they'll certainly have a story to tell about it. I just don't know what everyone's home looks like. I don't know where you're going to put it in your home. I've never been to your home in Seattle.
I sent you a picture of this glass. Remember the glass? I have this glass fronted cabinet that has, it has Lavinia's punch bowl in it and stuff. But anyway, it's almost like the objects take on new meaning because they acquire these new stories from the new people. So you don't feel like, oh no, the teapot's not going to be here.
Well, the whole point is to give up feeling that way about anything. The whole point of it is to start not feeling bad about, oh no, I'm not going to be here.
Exactly.
I mean, it's about letting go of everything, you know, yourself, your body, your ego, all your stuff. I mean, that's kind of the deeper part. And that way it's almost a sequel to Shopping for Buddhas.
Yeah.
Even though that was my third book and this is my eighth or ninth.
Yeah.
It sort of has that value to it. And the theme of letting go really does permeate a lot of my books. I don't know if anybody is interested in the book. I know the first edition is kind of expensive, but I did put in the chat column the two ways that you can get it. You can email me at jeff@jeffgreenwald.com or visit the 108objects.com website and order from the site. And that includes the price of shipping to the United States. I'm going to mail these books, and each one, of course, in the envelope will have a little sculpture wrapped in bubble wrap as well. But yeah, I think that's the fair way to do it. And once the objects, I will be delighted to see these objects have new homes and really curious to know the kind of relationship I'm going to have with them and the people who took them afterwards. So that's a big unknown for me. That's the mystery of this book for me. Where will these objects end up? And I doubt I'll be able to give away all of them. I mean, I keep coming back to that catheter. But honestly, there's other objects in the book too that might not be so easy for people to integrate.
I don't know. Your mom might want the catheter, or maybe your sister.
Catheter. It's all right.
Whatever.
Luckily, I didn't have to use a catheter.
Sorry. So actually, it's kind of an interesting idea. Do you know if Philology is still alive? He might be really proud of you for this.
Philology died about 8 years ago.
Well, I mean, in his memory, right? Like you're doing this. So the stage performance, you did one stage performance through the marsh via Zoom of this, and it was cool because it had, you know, all the squares with the pictures of the objects, then they sort of blinked and then landed on an object. And so I'm wondering if you have, like, if you think that you're going to do this as like you did the wheel, like
as a stage show.
Right.
That's the great irony of this whole thing. I mean, I think some of you probably already caught it. I put this book together to try to sort of put my show in book form. And now this book has birthed a new show in its own form. So it's sort of come full circle.
Yeah.
I would love to do the show continually. I can't use objects that are gone, of course, and that's sort of going to be another challenge. What I'd like to do is do it on stage with some of the objects. And I did it that one time on Zoom. I'm not crazy about doing the show on Zoom. It just doesn't really work for me to not be able to interact with the audience and feel their responses and really get that sense of a give and take. I don't know how many of you have performed on stage in any capacity, but a huge part of it is the interaction with the audience and taking the audience's energy and returning it to them. And you just can't do that on a Zoom performance. You really can't do it. So I'll wait till I can do it on stage again. At the moment.
Cool. Okay. So I'm wondering what you think is next, if what you're working on now, having contemplated like your body of work and hunting down these books and looking through them. I'm just eagerly await your next work. I think that your creative gifts are always imbued with a sense of hilarity and insight and meaning. And I just, looking forward to your next book or your next project or your next piece. So thank you. I'm going to kind of open it up for questions, and you can go ahead and just unmute yourselves and chime in with any questions for Jeff.
Jeff, how did you choose the objects?
Yeah, because Anne, there's still hundreds, if not thousands of objects in my flat. You know, I mean, there's many objects that were not chosen. I really had to, the object had to have some real importance to me in some significant way. And it had to sort of tell me a story. If I could look at an object, there were a lot of objects I looked at and I just like, I can't do anything with this. And those are the kind of objects you carry to the curb. But there were a number of objects, like a blue yo-yo that's in the book, like the Kodak beaker, like a little bamboo camera from Fiji. I looked at them and immediately sort of a story came to mind that I could tell about that object. There's the blue yo-yo. And yeah, that really was a requirement, that the object sort of reach out to me in a sense with its story. Some of them were more challenging than others. Others I just wrote in like 20 minutes. I knew the story so well in my mind. Others I had to, work on and rework because the story was a little less clear to me at first.
I have to say, in all of them, I think you took these objects and you told the story of the object's significance to you, and then you broadened the appeal. And I think we have this saying, like, if you go deep enough, you reach the universal. I feel like when you were writing about these objects, like you went deep enough into their meaning to you, kind of like that communication satellite one that you read, in that it has meaning for the reader too.
That's what I try to do with all my writing, and all of us who are writers try to do that with our writing.
It's our goal.
The goal is to have people come to the end with a sense of who they are as much as who you are.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome.
And try to tie up each story in a way that does that. It's not easy, and maybe all 108 stories is not always 100% successful, but some of them really do hit that note, and I'm very happy with those stories. The Moroccan story is one of them. Arthur C. Clarke, Letter to Me, is another. You be the judge when you look at the book, which stories really seem to come together most for you.
So Jeff,
were there any objects that you picked up and said, no, I can't let that go yet?
There are some objects I know I can't let go of yet, yeah. But the Buddha statue that I bought in Shopping for Buddhas is not one of the objects in the book. There's a ring I bought on a trip to Tibet, and there's a stand-in for that object in the book. It's called a Vajra. It's a Tibetan symbol of the thunderbolt, and that's a stand-in in the book. Yeah, but there are objects I can't let go of, and there are objects I'm just too lazy to let go of. Getting rid of stuff is work. I'm sure most of you know that. It's not like it gets rid of itself. That's the attraction of a fire, because you don't have to carry anything to the curb. As terrifying as it is, there's a cleansing property to it. But yeah, there are things I won't let go of. Most of the things I really won't let go of. What 3 things would you save if the wildfire was approaching your home? And of course, the computer would be one of them. The Buddha statue would be another. I'm sure I would have a few things that I would not want to ever let go of. But there's many, many things still surrounding me that I'm eager to let go of, and that I hope I can do in the sequel. 108 more beloved objects. I know. We'll see what happens. Son of 108 beloved objects. By the way, I just want to give a little shout out to Karen. Karen was the proofreader for the book.
Oh, wow.
That was a tough job. She did a really good job. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. So I have another question for you. You did this book with Steve Harvey, the founder of Burning Man, and you've attended Burning Man quite often, and I know they do kind of the barter system, but also this idea of burning the man. Can you talk about that a little bit as relates to this idea of possessions and just, getting rid of possessions and destroying
Yeah,
them?
I just correct two things though in the question. First of all, it's Larry Harvey. This is
What did I say?
Steve Harvey.
Oh my gosh, that's weird. Sorry.
And it's not a barter economy at Burning Man. It's a gift economy.
Gift economy, okay.
Yes, you give away things with expectation, no expectation.
Oh yeah, sorry. Got it.
And what people give away are sometimes very imaginative. People have brought ice cream trucks to the playa and given away chocolate covered ice cream pops to people they run into. A lot of people make jewelry and give away jewelry. I give away, one of the objects in my book is a bag of frankincense. I give away crystals of frankincense when I'm at Burning Man. That's my personal gift, each one in a little silk pouch. Yeah. Burning Man is a wonderful exercise in non-attachment. I mean, so it's one of the most extraordinary art festivals that's ever existed in human history, in my opinion. And some of the most beautiful installations that take weeks, months, years to build are brought there, assembled, and then burned. Some of them are saved because they're made of durable materials, but a lot of the most impressive ones, including the man itself, are set aflame during the final 3 or 4 days of nights of the festival. And it's quite something to see this beautiful installation that you've walked into, that you've enjoyed. Maybe you've meditated in it. Maybe you've met a new friend in there. Maybe you sat down and spent a hot afternoon inside the statue. I think of this gigantic 3-story high sculpture of Mother Hubbard's shoe that Mother Hubbard lived in, with all these different rooms and dioramas in every different room. And just seeing the shoe go up in flames with everything, sort of burning. By the way, all the toxic materials are removed from the sculptures before they're burned, wiring of plastic or rubber. But just to see this beautiful construction go up in flame, it's like watching a cremation in Kathmandu. I mean, some of you have been to Kathmandu with me, and just that sense you get of watching the body burn. It's not gory, it's not horrible, it's not terrifying. It's just what is. Nothing lasts forever. And when you watch something dissolve like that, you're just really reminded of the importance of non-attachment. So Burning Man, I think, has been an inspiration to me in many ways. And the book I wrote with Larry Harvey, I don't know if any of you have been to Burning Man, but he was one of the people who originated Burning Man in the mid-'80s on Baker Beach in San Francisco. He died 2 years ago at the age of 70 of a stroke. And as I said in one of the stories I read to all of you earlier, I've met a lot of remarkable people in my life, from the Dalai Lama to Arlo Guthrie. I've just been the full gamut. But I never had met a visionary like Larry Harvey. I mean, the book is a series of conversations that he and I had over a 3-year period, in which he teases out his ideas about Burning Man and community. And the book is free. It's on the Burning Man website. It's called Out of Nothing. And it just gives his take on the philosophy of this international event he created, which is now celebrated in more than 70 countries around the world and in every state in the United States. It's become a global phenomenon. It's not a religion, but it's based on 10 principles that Harvey created, which are absolutely principles that we should all live by. And, radical inclusivity, leave no trace, radical creativity, radical self-reliance. The 10 principles are really a wonderful code, like Buddhism, for a life worth living. So I can't really say enough wonderful things about the experience of Burning Man itself, or about Larry Harvey. May he rest in peace. I loved the man.
All right, thank you, Larry. Larry, not Steve. I don't know how I had Steve there. Does anyone else have any comments or questions about the book?
Just out of curiosity, had you thought of burning the objects and the meaning that might have, as opposed to giving them away?
Julie, I never did, possibly because of the toxic chemicals that burning them would release. I mean, that's a big thing. You don't want to, especially these days.
It's spare the air, I suppose, too.
Exactly. But the final object in the book is not really an object at all. And this brings us sort of back, fascinatingly. Erin, can you open to the picture of the last object in the book? The last object in the book is 108 books.
Yeah.
as one single object. And what you see a picture there of, just hold that, if you can see, this is a shrine at Burning Man resting on pillars of books. And then at the bottom of the page, back up a little, please, Erin. You see
US.
burning. That's the memorial to Larry Harvey at Burning Man 2 years ago. He was an avid reader, and he spent most of his time on the playa in a bookmobile where he'd spend the hot days reading. And that shrine is, his memorial and hundreds of his books going up in smoke. So that kind of brings us back full circle to our last conversation. But no, I never thought of burning these things. I never thought of an appropriate place I could do that. I could haul them all to Burning Man and burn them there.
Well, Julie, maybe you should acquire one and then you can burn it.
Yeah, I'd have to look through the book to see if any of them are made of wood. There is one wooden
You have
shoe.
that rope. There's a rope you could burn.
There's a
the
rope,
white
there's a
rope.
robe,
Rope.
and a robe. There's ROP and
A
ROB.
robe. Yeah, that's right. The Japanese. Yeah. Okay, well, Jeff, thank you so much for your presentation. Stay here though. I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole Salon series and the idea of these circles. And then I think I'll give Jeff the last word of the whole day. So the circles are optional groups that you can participate in that just involve like a discussion of some of the themes that we discussed here today, like your own personal discussion. And I sent Caroline, I think she sent out like kind of a guide, but one of the things that I suggest you do in the circle is to find more of Jeff's work. You can actually watch, I think, the video of your performance at the Marsh for this book.
Got some glitches in it apparently, but yes.
Right, and then you can also watch some strange travel suggestions. There's a lot of those videos out, I think. There are 2 objects in Hidden Compass. They have kind of a preview of the book with 2 objects. There's an interview with Broadway World that's really interesting about the book. But you could also go to Ethical Traveler, listen to some of the podcasts, find out about the awards that they do for best travel destinations. And so, as I said earlier, the Salon series is a series of 5 salons. This is the second one. The next one will be September 28th. And I'm going to have Matthew Felix, who interviewed me at the first one. He's a writer, podcaster, and speaker, and he speaks a lot about intuition, and that's what he's going to talk about September 28th. The title of his forthcoming book is called Have Fun Falling, and he's also written a novel called A Voice Beyond Reason about a young Spaniard's following his intuition. So he's going to talk about how to sharpen and follow our intuition. October 26th from Paris. I was planning on being there, but I postponed my trip. But 3 of my writers from Shakespeare and Company who I've worked with from the workshop there are going to talk about, they've forged kind of incredible paths for their writing, and they're going to talk about how they've gained inspiration being there in Paris and how they've kind of each pursued their different writing niches. And then the last one in this series is November 30th. Ernest White II, he's the writer and producer of Fly Brother, which is a series that premiered last year on public television. And he just wrapped up his 2nd season. And it's basically Ernest. He's quite a character. So it's about him kind of traveling the world, seeking connection wherever he goes. And that'll be really fun. So if you want to ensure space at each one, you have to go sign up for the series. If we have extra spots, then we'll offer individual events to sign up if there's space. I hope you have been inspired to view your own beloved objects in a new way and to delve into and maybe even write some of your stories. And I think I'll give Jeff the last word of the day. What wisdom do you have to impart
Well, I first want to say thank you for inviting me on your salon. And
You're welcome.
it's been really wonderful to spend this time with you, Erin. You've long been a supporter of my work, and I really value your writing.
Thank you.
And I'm also a really wonderful host. The irony of selling the book is not lost on me. I mean, it's basically, it's an object. But, you know, I sort of see it as an investment in letting go of objects. If you do get this book, maybe it'll inspire you to let go of 5 other objects in your life, and it'll all balance out. It's wonderful to have the book out there in the world. I'm very proud of it. It's different from anything else I've ever done, and I think it brings together so many aspects of my life. The ethical travel aspect, my life as an artist, my life as a friend, as a lover, and as a traveler. And I'm very proud of it. I think it's physically very beautiful. I love the little sculpture it comes with. And I'm just, you know, any of you who are writers or have ever worked on any big project in your lives know that feeling of sort of release and sadness when a project like this sort of reaches a point where there's very little true creativity left involved, but a lot of marketing or sort of wrapping up or deciding what comes next. And that's the space I'm in now. I'm working on some editorial journalistic pieces. I do not know what my next book will be, but when I do, I'm sure you'll all find out about it. I also want to just remind you that if you are interested in the book at all, Jeff@jeffgreenwald.com is my email. The books are retailing for $108, but in the letter I'm going to send out that you will get if you give me your email, it says a contribution of any size is sufficient. The books cost about $85 each to produce in this limited edition, so I'm hoping to recoup my expenses. And that's the reason the books are so ridiculously expensive. But it's a worthy object to have if you're going to have an object. And I'm just really grateful to all of you for being here, tuning in. It's lovely to see you. I just want to have a special shout out to my sister, Deborah, who's just spent 2 weeks with me after my foot surgery here in Oakland, helping me go through all the copies of the books that we received and just pick out the ones that had problems and send them back for reprinting. I could not have done it without her, not even on my knee scooter.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. And I challenge you to maybe even write one of your stories of your objects. But thank you, Jeff. And we'll see you guys next time.